Picture this. The sun is a merciless, white-hot coin in a dusty sky. Below it, 3 nooses sway in a phantom breeze, their shadows dancing like skeletal fingers on the parched earth of a town square. This is Redemption Creek, a place where the name has become a bitter joke. 3 women stand on the gallows, their hands bound, their faces pale but resolute. They are Elara, her chin held high, defiance a burning ember in her eyes. Beside her, the gentle, silver-haired Martha, whose hands, though tied, seem to be clasped in prayer. And finally, young Sarah, barely a woman, her gaze fixed on a distant, broken horizon, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. A man watches them from the steps of the saloon, a cruel smile playing on his lips. This is Silas Kane, a bandit who wears the town's fear like a crown. Next to the gallows, the mayor, a man whose spine was sold long ago, clears his throat and begins to read from a piece of paper, his voice trembling with a cowardice that stinks worse than the rotgut whiskey Kane serves. For the crimes of treason, theft, and inciting rebellion against the good people of this town, the words are lies, each one a stone cast upon the already broken backs of the townsfolk gathered below. They stand silent, their eyes downcast, a congregation of ghosts haunting their own lives. You watch this scene unfold, and you have to ask yourself, what could these 3 women have possibly done to warrant this? What last words could they offer that might cut through the thick veil of terror and expose the festering wound at the heart of this town? To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning. It had started with hope, as most tragedies do. Elara, Martha, and Sarah had arrived in Redemption Creek months earlier, a small, hopeful caravan of 3 souls searching for a place to put down new roots. Elara's husband had fallen to fever on the trail, Martha's had been lost to a rockslide in the mines, and Sarah's parents had been taken by the unforgiving winter. They were survivors, bound by a shared grief and an unyielding will to live. They pooled their meager resources and opened a small laundry service, their hands, chapped and sore, working tirelessly to wring a living from dirty linen and the kindness of strangers. But kindness was a currency in short supply in Redemption Creek. The town's economy ran on fear, and the bank was Silas Kane. His gang of thugs were the collectors. They didn't take a percentage, they took what they wanted, when they wanted. Protection was a word they used for extortion. The sheriff was a hollow man with a tin star and a full pocket, and the mayor smiled and nodded as Kane carved up the town like his personal fiefdom. The women saw it immediately. They saw the averted eyes of the blacksmith as Kane's men took a new set of horseshoes without paying. They saw the bruised face of the baker's wife after she dared to say she had no bread left to give. They felt the cold dread that settled with the dusk. Their defiance was not a grand, heroic gesture. It was small, quiet, and profound. It happened on a sweltering Tuesday when one of Kane's men, a brute named Jeb, swaggered into their laundry. He overturned a basket of freshly cleaned and folded clothes, ground them into the dirt with his boot, and demanded they hand over their week's earnings. Martha began to tremble, and Sarah shrank behind a washtub. But Elara, her hands still steaming from the hot water, simply stepped forward. "No," she said. The word was not a shout. It was a simple statement of fact, as solid and immovable as a mountain. Jeb laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "What did you say, little lady?" Elara met his gaze, her own eyes like chips of flint. "I said no. This is our money. We earned it. You will not have it." For a moment, the brute was stunned into silence by her audacity. Then, his face purpled with rage. He raised a hand to strike her, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't fear he saw there. It was a promise. Before he could act, the town's grocer, Mr. Henderson, a man shriveled by fear, scurried out and pressed a few coins into Jeb's hand, muttering apologies. Jeb spat on the ground at Elara's feet. "Kane will hear about this," he snarled, before stomping out. That night, a rock shattered their window, a message wrapped around it, "Get out or be buried." They knew it wasn't an empty threat. They had challenged the serpent, and now it would seek to swallow them whole. With the moon as their only guide, they packed what little they could carry and fled into the treacherous, rocky wilderness that bordered the town, leaving behind a dream that had barely begun. The desert was a crucible, intent on burning away their resolve. Days bled into a haze of sun and thirst, their hope dwindling with their water supply. Just as they were about to succumb, to lie down and let the buzzards claim them, they saw it. Tucked away in a small, hidden canyon, shielded by ancient junipers, was a cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a fragile ribbon of life in a landscape of death. They stumbled towards it, their last reserves of strength spent. The door creaked open before they reached it. A man emerged, framed in the doorway like a figure carved from the rock and wood around him. He was tall and broad, with a face that looked as if it had been locked in a permanent battle with sorrow. A pale, jagged scar ran from his left temple to the corner of his stern mouth, a roadmap of past pains. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, took in their ragged forms with a hard, unreadable expression. This was Jedediah, a man in self-imposed exile from the world. He offered them water, then bread, his movements economical and his silence profound. He did not ask for their story, and they did not offer it. For 3 days, they existed in this quiet space, healing under his reluctant care. Martha mended his torn shirts with a practiced hand, Sarah swept the hearth and spoke to his skittish dog, and Elara, seeing the deep-set exhaustion in his eyes, simply worked alongside him, chopping wood and hauling water, matching his silence with her own. He was a fortress, and she was beginning to see the cracks in the walls. On the 4th evening, as a cool wind whispered through the canyon, he finally spoke. "You're the women from the town," he stated, not a question. "The ones who stood up to Cain," Elara nodded, watching him. "He runs that town," Jedediah said, his voice a low rumble. "Always has." He turned his gaze to the fire, and the flames danced in his haunted eyes. "He took this from me," he said, gesturing vaguely to the scar on his face, but his eyes said he meant more than that. "He took everything. My wife. My boy. They died in a fire he set because I wouldn't give him my land. I came out here to forget. To be left alone." The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. In that moment, Elara understood the depth of his solitude. It wasn't a choice, it was a prison built of grief. "We cannot go back," Elara said softly. "And we cannot survive out here alone," a silent plea passed between them. He saw in her the same defiance that had cost him everything, but he also saw a strength he thought had vanished from the world. Reluctantly, he nodded. A new, unspoken contract was sealed. The days that followed were a balm. Jedediah, the stoic protector, began to slowly unthaw. He taught them to track, to find water, to read the signs of the land. He taught them to shoot, placing his old rifle in Elara's steady hands, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary as he corrected her stance. He showed Martha which herbs could be used for medicine, and he even carved a small wooden bird for Sarah, the first smile touching his lips in years as she accepted it. They were no longer 3 refugees and a hermit. They were a family, forged not of blood, but of shared hardship and burgeoning affection. The small cabin, once a monument to loss, became a sanctuary of hope. Laughter, a sound long absent, began to echo in the canyon. But Silas Cain was a man obsessed with power, and their defiance was a debt he intended to collect. His shadow was long, and it was creeping ever closer to their fragile paradise. The peace was shattered on a day when the sky itself seemed to weep. Dark, bruised clouds gathered over the canyon, and a cold wind tore through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and ruin. Jedediah felt it first, a prickling on his skin, an old instinct screaming a warning. He had just returned from checking his snares when he saw the tracks. Not deer or coyote. Horses. Shod horses. At least a dozen. His blood ran cold. He burst back into the cabin, his face a mask of grim urgency. "He's here," he said, his voice tight. "Cain. Get the rifles. Bar the door, fear, a guest long since banished, returned with a vengeance. But it was tempered by resolve. Sarah, her hands shaking, loaded a pistol. Martha, her face set, took up a position by the window. Elara stood beside Jedediah, the weight of the rifle in her hands feeling familiar, an extension of her own will. The storm broke as the first riders appeared at the edge of the clearing. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning the ground to mud. Cain sat on his black stallion, a monstrous silhouette against the lightning-streaked sky, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer. Jedediah, he roared, his voice cutting through the thunder. I knew you were still crawling around out here. And I see you've collected some strays. Throw them out, and I might let you live in your pathetic hole. Jedediah's response was a single, sharp crack from his rifle. The bullet splintered the pommel of Cain's saddle. It was his answer. The world erupted into chaos. Gunfire exploded from all sides, a deafening symphony of violence. Wood splintered from the cabin walls. Glass shattered. Inside, the four of them moved as one. They fired, reloaded, and fired again, a desperate, valiant stand against an overwhelming tide. Jedediah was a force of nature, his movements precise and deadly, felling two of Cain's men before they could even dismount. Elara fought at his side, her fear burned away by a cold, clear rage. They were protecting more than a cabin, they were protecting a home, a family, a reason to live. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. A bullet tore through Jedediah's shoulder, sending him staggering back with a cry of pain. Another ricocheted off the stove, grazing Martha's arm. Cain's men, emboldened, charged the cabin. They kicked down the door, splintering the wood that had been a symbol of their safety. The fight became a brutal, close-quarters struggle. Jedediah, weakened by blood loss, fought like a cornered wolf, but was bludgeoned from behind with a rifle butt and collapsed to the floor. The women were seized, their arms twisted behind their backs, their faces shoved into the mud. Cain strode into the violated cabin, his boots crunching on broken glass. He looked down at the unconscious Jedediah, then at the three captive women, his eyes glittering with sadistic pleasure. You should have stayed gone, he hissed at Elara. You thought you could defy me? No one defies me, he turned to his men. Burn it, he commanded. Burn it all, as the flames began to lick at the dry wooden walls, consuming their sanctuary, their memories, their hope. Cain dragged the three women out into the rain. They were thrown over horses like sacks of grain, and as they were led away, Elara's last sight was of the cabin being swallowed by a roaring inferno, the orange light a horrifying parody of the warm hearth they had once shared. And so we return to the gallows, to the merciless sun and the silent, waiting ropes. Silas Cain believes he has won. He has captured his defiant quarry, destroyed their sanctuary, and is about to make a public spectacle that will cement his reign of terror forever. The mayor finishes his litany of false charges, his voice trailing off into the suffocating silence. Cain steps forward. Have you any last words, he asks, his voice dripping with mock benevolence. Any pleas for the mercy you do not deserve? He expects them to weep, to beg. He is wrong. It is Martha who speaks first. Her voice, though frail, carries across the square with surprising clarity. I see faces I know, she begins, her eyes scanning the crowd. Mrs. Gable, I helped deliver your youngest son. Mr. Henderson, we bought our flour from you. We were your neighbors. We shared your bread. Look at what you are allowing. Look at the silence you are keeping. God will not judge this man alone for this day. He will judge you for the silence that condoned it. A ripple of shame passes through the crowd. Eyes that were downcast begin to lift. Next, young Sarah speaks, her voice trembling but pure. She isn't looking at Cain, but at the children hiding behind their parents' legs. I used to dream of growing up here, she says, the tear finally falling from her eye. I dreamed of having a family. Is this the town you want them to inherit? A place where courage is punished and evil is rewarded? What will you tell them when they ask what you did on the day they hanged 3 innocent women? Her words are a dagger to the heart of every parent present. Finally, it is Alara's turn. She steps forward, the rope casting a shadow across her face. She fixes her gaze not on Cain, but on the mayor. "Mayor Thompson," she says, her voice ringing like steel. "You took Cain's money to ignore his crimes. Sheriff Miller, you wear that star to protect him, not us. Mr. Henderson, you paid our toll to keep his men from your door. You all thought your small compromises would buy you peace. But you were not buying peace. You were feeding a monster, and now it has grown strong enough to devour you all." She turns her burning gaze back to Cain. "This rope isn't for me," she declares, her voice rising with righteous power. "This gallows is not our tomb. It is a monument to your own cowardice. Your silence is the rope around your own necks." As her last word echoes across the square, a gasp ripples through the crowd. A figure is stumbling toward them from the edge of town. He is covered in blood and soot, his clothes torn, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. But he is walking. It is Jedediah. He is alive. His survival is a miracle, a testament to Cain's failure. His very presence is an accusation that no one can ignore. He is the truth made flesh. That is the spark. The sight of the wounded Jedediah, coupled with Alara's incandescent words, finally breaks the spell of fear. An old farmer, his face a leathery mask of fury, lets out a guttural roar and throws a rock that smashes into the saloon window. It is the signal. The dam of fear breaks, and a flood of righteous anger is unleashed. The townspeople surge forward. The sheriff's few loyal deputies, seeing the tide turn, throw down their badges and melt into the crowd. The mayor shrieks and tries to run, but is swarmed. As chaos erupts, Jedediah, with a last, desperate surge of strength, climbs the gallows stairs. He pulls a knife from his boot and, with a single, sawing motion, cuts the rope holding Alara. He moves to Martha, then to Sarah, freeing them as the town they tried to save finally saves them in return. The battle is short and brutal. The people of Redemption Creek, armed with fury and tools from their own trades, overwhelm Cain's thugs. Cain himself is cornered by Jedediah and the blacksmith, his reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with the whimpering of a coward. The aftermath is not one of victory, but of sober rebirth. The sun begins to set, casting a golden, forgiving light on the square. The guilty are imprisoned, the corrupt exposed. Jedediah, his wounds tended by Martha, stands beside Alara. They look out at the people of Redemption Creek, who are not strangers anymore, but neighbors, united by a shared, painful, and beautiful redemption. Their found family of 4 has become a found family of 100. The town has a soul again. What is it that turns silence into a roar? When does fear finally give way to courage? The story of Redemption Creek is not just a tale of the Old West. It is a story about the quiet compromises we make every day, hoping to avoid conflict, only to find we have paved the road for tyranny. It is a testament to the fact that true power is not held by the man with the most guns, but by the community that refuses to be broken. The voices of Alara, Martha, and Sarah on that gallows were more powerful than any bullet, because they spoke a truth that was buried in the hearts of everyone who listened. They reminded them of who they were meant to be. If this story of defiance and the enduring strength of the human spirit moved you, let us know in the comments below. What would you have done? Share this video to remind others that even the smallest voice can ignite a revolution. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of courage that history must never forget.